All right, in this segment, we're going to take a look at classes and object, just a basic introduction to this new concept. So we're going to cover basically what is an OOP, what a class is, how to create a class, and how to access the class itself. When it comes down to OOP, it is short for Object-Oriented Programming. Be a method of constructing a program by building relative properties and also set up behaviors into an individual object. So let's take a look to see what it's all meant by building up properties and individual objects. So in this example, we're going to have a person, and that person properties might have components such as name, age, and address associated with this particular object. In addition to, we're going to have maybe some specific behaviors here of like running, talking for this particular object that we're creating. So you can see that there's going to be a multitude of components that are able to integrate into an object. Another example would be utilizing email. So we would have information pertaining to recipient list, the subject, the body of the email, and then specific behaviors such as attaching different file types, sending the particular mail. So you can see that we're able, again, to create some objects. So before we get into the details, let's take a look of a way that we're able to utilize this with our existing knowledge. So one way to keep track of employees is to use a list, and this definitely works, that we have a username here, and then we have a list of information pertaining to the user. But one thing that it does lack is basically some additional functionality. So we're just storing the variable information, but if we wanted to have things that we may constantly do, perhaps display an index card of the individual, it's not really built into this particular feature set. We would have to write a separate piece of code for that to happen. Now, if we basically create an object, we're going to have a couple elements associated with this. So we have example of a cat. So we're going to have a name, color, and weight. And then we have a function that we would have here. So this all would be considered an object. These components here are going to be your variables, property variables of the object. And then we're able to create then additional types of tasks, which are functions that we would write. And all this could be basically wrapped up into a single variable. So this now is referring to all this information. And we're able to create a multitude of variables to reference this particular object type. Looking a little bit closer here, again, these are going to be instances of the variables, attributes, and these would be the different methods. So we kind of utilized something similar. For example, the random number feature. So we imported the random number feature, and we had different methods that we're able to utilize with that. So once again, we set up our object. We have identified that this object is named cat, and this is going to be our template. Again, we have our variables, and then we have any functions that we're going to be creating there. And here is one variable that's referencing this entire object. And then we're able to create another variable to keep track of this particular object. So you could see that all these are basically referencing that particular template. So the syntax is actually pretty easy. It kind of starts out something similar to utilizing a function, but here we're identifying that this is a class. And then typically what you want to do is when you create a class, utilize a capital letter for the class object, so you know that this is basically a class type. And then from there, we see that again the class is the keyword, name given to the class, separated by a colon, and this is basically the complete syntax. So again, we're starting out with defining the class object. And now this is where it gets interesting, because this is where you would write all your code about this particular object. So the first thing here is your def, and this is a double underscore, looks like a single line here, init, and then we have this information here, self, and then the variables that we want to utilize. So we have name, color, and weight, and this is what they refer to as the constructor. Now, obviously, we could add a lot more variables to this if we need to. Again, it really depends on the object. So the variables that we end up utilizing here correspond to self.name, self.color, self.weight. Now, it seems a little bit weird and redundant, but when we pass the variables associated to here, it's going to be assigned to self.name, color, and weight, because we could utilize this information that is inside this class to perform specific functions. So we want to basically print, my cat's name is, and you notice that this information here is being referenced down below here. And we're able to create all these different functions and do anything and everything that we learned about programming for this specific object. Now, how do we basically create an instance of a class? Well, that's pretty easy. We have a variable name that we assign. This is going to be the class that we're going to be utilizing, and these are going to be the parameters that are associated for that. So if you remember the slide before, we had name, color, and weight. Now we're identifying name, color, and weight here. So all this information now is being all addressed to that. And again, this cat class is going to be identifying. Now when we want to utilize this in different parts of our code, we're able then to utilize the variable name. So we have our print statement, in parentheses our variable name that we assigned, and then the additional variables that we have created inside here. So that's how it would be displayed. And then we had a function. So this was basically our class that we end up defining. So now we have our variable that we establish here, and when we do something like this, the variable dot print intro, open close paren, it basically is going to execute all that particular code. So again, that's the variable name, and that's going to be the function that is going to be inside the class. So in the next component, we're going to do a 5-minute code and actually take all this information and put it into actual syntax.